Welcome to Sumbits, where we decode the PowerSchool development experience. Sumbits is brought to you by MBA. Let's start the show.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Sumbits, joined always by Ryan Cockrum and Eric Scheidel. I'm Sean Cobby, and we have two esteemed guests today, and they actually come from MBA. There are two of our newer developers, and we were really thinking like, hey, they're longtime developers, but they're kind of new to the PowerSchool game, so we wanted to get that perspective. But before we get too far into it, of course, we are having a cocktail. Today I'm drinking High West American Prairie Bourbon. Very just, I don't want to say basic, but very typical bourbon. Is pretty delicious. It is 92 proof, so a little bit higher than the normal 80, but it's drinks pretty smooth. What are you guys drinking?
I decided to try three different beers that I hadn't tried before. Into a Galactic Space Dragon right now. It's they're all three are IPAs, but this one so far it's really good, and it's really it's more of ale than it's more smooth and bitey. I've also got a Bubble Stash, which I might head into, and if that will be the second one, and if I get to the second one, then I have a Foxtrot waiting in line. We'll see.
Love the labels. Can we go back to the second one? It said Cryo Hops.
I think that would be the brewery. Yeah.
Oh, that's the brewery. Okay. Thought there was maybe some type of hops that I wasn't aware of.
You know what? No, the brewery is Hop Valley. So,
do you have any idea what cryo hops are?
Those hops were cryogenically frozen back in the 1860s, as a matter of fact.
Our stash of Mosaic Cryo Hops, trademark, bring a blend of fruity tropical flavors and a touch of resin to this new age IPA. So it's a proprietary hop.
And that, it tells me nothing, but okay. What about you, Eric? What orange beer are you drinking today?
I'm excited. I promise to step up my game with the beer and not bring the Miller Lights and Spotted Cows every week. So I went to the store today, and friends. Now, I don't in any way, shape, or form wish to hasten the arrival of the fall time, but I've always been thoroughly disturbed that my favorite style of beer, the Oktoberfest, is typically only seasonally available. So I was at the store today, last day of August, and I managed to find this from Great Lakes Brewery, which is here in Wisconsin. I like my Wisconsin brews in Milwaukee. It's their Oktoberfest. So I'm a happy guy.
I am looking forward to trying some Wisconsin brews in a couple of months.
I was also looking forward to hastening the fall. I won't lie. So I was looking to get spiced whiskey or something unique. So today I have whatever James is holding up. There we go. Curveball. It's a barbecue whiskey, apparently, but it's got a lot of sense of like smoky and bacon, surprisingly, and a little bit of barbecue as well. So it's very flavorful. I'm enjoying it so far.
Sounds like a very American.
I'm drinking Tropicalia Creature Comfort. It's the brewery. They're local. They're in Athens, Georgia, but they're about an hour away from where we're at. But yeah,
relatively
delicious.
Local. So I just realized I didn't actually tell our guests what our guests' names are, and we are joined. Well, we are going to go by Becky, correct?
Right.
Okay, Becky Cowart.
Like a cow that does art.
Cowart. Got it.
Just like that.
So joined by Becky Cowart, and James Cowart. I'm gonna.
Well, you don't need to enunciate it.
Really enunciate it now.
Watch me over the cow part, not the art.
And as you might imagine, they are married, which is pretty cool. Two developers.
It's not just a coincidence.
Not just a coincidence. They're not brother and sister. But anyway, so we heard what they're drinking and vaguely where you're from. But if you guys want to kind of take turns or just let us know where you're hailing from and how you came to be about an MBA developer.
We hail from Atlanta and around Atlanta, which is where James is from. But I'm from Augusta, and that's another large city in Georgia. But that's where we live, and we're currently a whole wall apart.
Yeah, she's right through there.
It's nice that you have your own office.
Yeah.
So we couldn't work in the same room.
I mean, it's bad enough you're in the same house, right?
No, that's actually good.
So we can't help but notice that you have an Auburn pennant in your background, James.
Yes, sir.
So are you an Auburn graduate?
Recently, I am. I started there in 2008 and had a little bit too much fun, left for a while. But I recently finished my my computer science degree, like this year actually. So that's exciting. So now I am an official Auburn alumni.
Congratulations!
You can't see my pennant.
Tiger, and Plainsman. Is that what we decided on? You guys decided
yeah,
to have
Plainsman.
Well,
the War Eagle is more of like a battle cry. It's not necessarily a mascot, but
you actually have an eagle at your football games.
Oh yeah, it's called Nova.
Yeah. I mean, so
it's like Nova
technically
6 or 7. Right? I don't remember what they're at now at this point. To be honest,
it's like how everybody's uncle names their dog, and whenever it passed away, they named the next dog the same thing.
Yeah, it's exactly like that.
Yeah, for our other Midwestern viewers, you probably think of Butler, and they have a bulldog that has been the same way. It's been the same family, same name of a bulldog. But anyway, the real reason we're here is you guys both came from a development programming background and have recently joined MBA as a PowerSchool developer. So we want to kind of talk about that and how that's going for you and what struggles you kind of came across while trying to learn PowerSchool. But I'd like to hear a little bit about each of your development background before we get into the PowerSchool world.
Okay, I'll go first. So most of my experience is actually as a teacher, but I've got a few years of experience as a developer as well. Mostly in the realm of education. So I've been a developer at a local university in Augusta for a little while. And I've done some side projects with some other devs that are colleagues and friends. So my experience is, I would say, more limited to the education realm already. But it was really interesting stepping into PowerSchool for sure. None of my experience had anything to do with PowerSchool. So I would say that I've dealt mostly with like secondary education, so college level technology, I suppose. So it's been really fun and interesting going into this. And I'll let James go.
Well, I initially got into development after I left Auburn. I was working at a company where I did a lot of development through WordPress, and so getting used to that that CMS was kind of similar to PowerSchool, but way more dumbed down. So navigating through PowerSchool has kind of reminded me of the different versions of WordPress that I'd go through, but this is definitely way more complex. I have hit my head against the wall a couple times, but it all makes. Say that again.
I said, hopefully that doesn't bother Becky too much.
Oh yeah, it's fine. Yeah,
it's
not that wall. I hit the other wall. But then one of my other previous gigs, we had a headless installation of WordPress. So we built the site on React, but just would make adjustments through WordPress, and so that took me a little bit more away from WordPress, which I loved. But so this has kind of been exciting and stressful at the same time, learning how to navigate through PowerSchool. But it makes sense. It's just you need to figure out what makes what tick.
So what were your? Oh,
I was just going to say I was excited to find out that working with PowerSchool was not the same as working in like a typical WYSIWYG for what the universities typically use in their CMSs. So that was pretty cool.
Okay, so that kind of answers partly, I guess, what my question would be here in a way. Like, what were your first impressions, though, when you were, as developers coming in going, yeah, you're going to do developments for this information system called PowerSchool. Here you go.
Yeah, ready
Well,
to go.
I had no idea what PowerSchool was initially. Becky did because she is a teacher. But so, I feel like she at least had a little bit of exposure, not necessarily on the development end, but I was going in blind.
So Becky, when you were a teacher, did your district actually use PowerSchool?
They didn't yet,
Okay.
but now I'm pretty sure they do, or at least the adjacent county does, because I've worked in a couple of different counties. But one of them definitely did. I didn't use it as a teacher. I think, the admin probably did, like the vice principal and the counselor and stuff, but the teachers didn't use it. I think we used a different kind of software, but I definitely prefer PowerSchool. Almost every day I find myself thinking like, man, I wish I would have had this feature. Anytime I'm working in the MBA stuff, I'm like, man, that would have been great. Wouldn't have had to do it by hand. Yeah. So one thing I was surprised of first impression was that, as a developer, you have this long list of like technologies that you know and have used, and you fill out your resume and you're like, oh, look at all these wonderful languages I know. But then you come in to MBA and they have a couple languages that you don't know, but including some really inclusive ones like PowerSchool tags and TLS SQL. Like those are very niche, so like no one is going to know them, and so it's very exciting and new to learn several new languages at one time.
So speaking of T-list, or actually just in general of those PowerSchool specific things, have they all kind of made sense based on your development background, or like are they just kind of completely their own and no way of really understanding it until you start using it?
I think that they've. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I think that they've made sense. I think that in a way, T-list SQL is kind of like, it fits into the puzzle like SQL does, but it extends across like a couple more pieces kind of thing. So it's like an extra large puzzle piece. So it still feels like you're putting a puzzle together, but you can do multiple different steps in different languages. So like T-list can cover maybe 3 pieces of the puzzle instead of just one that SQL might. So that's been fun.
What were you thinking, James?
I was going to say that like it does all fit in, but especially with TLS SQL, for instance, like just different syntax changes, getting used to them, that can be tough for me at least. But for the most part, it all makes sense at least. There hasn't been anything that I've been confronted with where I've been like, I have no idea what's going on. It's just more like I need to just do this a couple times and it'll make more sense. Because I mean, it's fairly intuitive, but it's new, so take some time.
Calling it fairly intuitive, would you have said that like your first week diving into it?
Nope.
I wouldn't have said that about the PowerSchool interface. I would not say that's intuitive.
No.
Do you have any? And I mean, I've got one that I'll probably never forget with Becky here. A story from when you were first getting involved with PowerSchool, where your development skill set, like what you know and what you know to be true, failed you when it came to incorporating that into PowerSchool, because PowerSchool is PowerSchool.
Yes. Yeah, that's definitely true.
I think I know specifically what you're hinting at here, Ryan. I'm curious to see what your answer to this question is, but I'm going to let.
No, please, I'd love to hear.
I don't have an answer, so.
Well, mine was with Becky, and she was having an issue specifically because we were talking about T-list here, getting a query to work, and we were talking about PSHTML as well, and she was using if statements within her query, which totally makes sense. The exception was that she was using a SQL comment to comment out lines of this code.
I knew this was going to be it.
Yeah. No, and
Okay,
I
I've run
think
into
it's
this
valid. And the issue was, of course, that the comment was not commenting out the PSHTML at all, because the PSHTML doesn't even pay attention to that. So what she was commenting out was the beginning and the end of the if statement. And I forget exactly how it works now because I can't see it. But either way, it wasn't actually commenting out anything, and she couldn't figure out why she wasn't getting her records. But it was because I said, "Oh, just so you know, that if statement still exists." And I just remember you going, "Oh, what?" I
Yeah,
heard
I've
your
run
head
into
hit the
that.
desk. Like,
Yeah, many beautiful hours of frustration have been spent learning the new tech stack in
Yeah.
MVA.
The
It's been fun though and
row
interesting.
templates have thrown me off. Like really, comments have thrown me off so much.
Yeah.
Just having a comment where you shouldn't.
Troubleshooting. Also.
the row templates, I think, throw people off for a long time. I think I've said this in videos in the past that I always feel like the way that TList, SQL, and the row templates themselves are taught and have been documented in the past don't do much more than say they are good for creating rows and tables. And the actual, and I mean, that's how they look at it, and that's how I thought of them for a long time until I started realizing, oh no, I can repeat whatever data I want as many times as I can, and it can be a JSON object, it can just be individual strings on a screen, whatever. So yeah, when you look at it from that aspect, I think people still struggle with what a row template can actually do, even years into it.
Yeah, that's been one of my most interesting things, I would say. And that's what I meant by T-list SQL, being SQL, but also being like 3 or 4 more puzzle pieces, because there's just so much you can do at the bottom of it in the row template.
So one
that
thing that
there
I
is, you were talking about those little intricacies and the oddities of what works and what doesn't in the context of T-list SQL. And I want to throw this out there because this was like the light bulb for, I think, a lot of the new devs that we've hired recently. Just talking about troubleshooting with T-list SQL, the thing you always got to remember, right, is when you have an error in your SQL, you don't see an error on the page. That's happened under the hood. So you can go to your system logs and check that out. But a trick that I learned from someone who won't be named, but if you just pop that tilde off the front of your T-list SQL, then it'll spit the SQL directly out on the page. You can copy it into a SQL editor and troubleshoot it from there, right? Because when you don't see results, one of two things happen. Either there are just no results to show.
Wait, hold on, dude. Can you
Yeah,
see
are you
Ryan's face
yawning
right
or are you?
Oh, no, he's in shock.
Are you falling
He's
asleep
pissed.
there, Ryan, or have I
I'm
shocked?
speechless.
Shooketh
have I revolutionized your
or
world?
sleepy?
I mean, I've gone as far as going into the logs to copy the because it'll show up there in the log, but that makes it way easier.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Like 2 weeks ago, James was told by a colleague,
Trey.
pop the tilde off, and it'll render to the DOM, but it'll already be calculated out. All the PowerSchool tags that otherwise wouldn't work in Oracle are then translated into the data itself, so it would work if you copied and pasted that from your DOM to Oracle. And he was so
Well, and I'm just thinking of all the times I've copied it and and cut out
You got
the
curse
PSHTML and then replaced all the GPDs with the
Yes.
actual value.
I mean, this
Yeah,
gotta make you
when
laugh
when
a
I
little
found
bit,
this
right?
out, I was really this
So
exists.
And it's so
Becky
obvious.
and James have been developing in PowerSchool for like less than a year. Ryan's been in PowerSchool for a dozen years, and he's now just learning about it.
Oh man.
And it's entirely obvious. Like, I mean, I hate, like, it makes complete sense. That's the thing.
Why didn't I think of that? Yeah, right. You know what though, Ryan? This, my friends, I gotta say, to our friends, the Cowarts, there are a lot of people listening right now that just hate your guts. You know why? Because when we started in this game, we were on our own. We just had to like figure it out, man. We didn't have like that's the thing that I feel like you guys are really so lucky because you've got Ryan to reach out to, and you've got so many of the
Got
other
you to
developers
reach
at
out
NBA
to.
with experience. Yeah, but I try to ignore you guys as much as possible. You know?
You're the only
But
one that
yeah,
answers.
It's
Just
just
kidding.
you guys really have a leg up. So many people got started in this game without really anything to reference, and really it until I'd say relatively recently, it wasn't well documented. I mean, I may have told this story on a podcast before, so forgive me if I'm repeating myself, but I remember going to one of my first PSUs, PowerSchool University, and they were talking about PSHTML, and they taught me about T-list SQL. Well, you guys learned about that in the first few days that you started working at MBA, because we're here showing you like this is how you develop in PowerSchool. I didn't have that benefit, but at least my superiors had the wherewithal to go, we need to send him to this training to learn some stuff. So a couple months after I started, I learned about this thing called T-list SQL, and I'm like, well, this changes my world. This is revolutionary. And I went up to the instructor after the class, and I'm like, dude, this is awesome. How do you know all this stuff? Where is it documented? He looks at me and he shrugs and he goes, tribal knowledge. And I am not one to shoot the messenger, so I went easy on him, but that was so infuriating. Like, this is a product that is touted for the fact that it's so customizable. And I completely sympathize with the fact that PowerSchool doesn't support customizations. But if you're going to sell a product based on the fact that it's customizable, then it needs to be at least documented how to go about customizing.
Sure.
Yes, and
that's the end of my soapbox. Thank you for
I'll just tack on a little bit of gratitude at the end, because once I saw your PS customization documentation, Eric,
I was about to chime in and say the same thing.
I mean, my heart was just so full. I was like, thank goodness, coming into this position, learning 3 new languages or new technologies, and it's actually documented. I was just so grateful.
that reminds me, I've got one PSHTML that you got to throw on there that I again forgot how to do, and I have examples of it, but in the middle of a call yesterday, I was like, oh, where did I do this last? Because it's not documented anywhere. It's when you're doing multiple using one of the F functions to do multiple ins with an if.
Oh.
Huh.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah,
it's not
too familiar with that one.
It's like when you want to do, when you're doing a if cur school ID equals, if you're doing it one school ID, this is how you can do essentially if cur school ID in, and then put in a little array school IDs, so you can do multiple, so you don't have to get all crazy or try to reinvent the wheel with some kind of SQL or JavaScript. You can just use the PSHTML, but spit it in there.
I apologize. I need to interrupt and change the subject momentarily. I need to step away for just a moment because I got my second beer out of the cooler and realized I left the bottle opener in the kitchen. So you all talk amongst yourselves. I'll be right back.
Everyone chug while he's gone.
I know, right?
I mean, I could use the restroom.
Price is averted.
You to go before.
5103.
Oh no, I come back and James has left us.
Yeah,
well,
he went potty.
He didn't drain the vein before.
Okay.
We told him to. We warned him.
Well, no, I'll wait till James comes back, because Ryan, I wanna touch back on the question that you asked to the Cowarts a while ago about something that you know to be true. Because Your answer was definitely a valid one, but it's not where I thought you were going, the way that you kind of set that up.
Oh, then I forgot. Mine was the T list. Mine was the T list with the commenting out story.
Well, here's where I thought you were going, because this is something, and then you said, I've known this to be true, and then I got into the PowerSchool development world, and
does it involve dollar signs?
No.
Oh, let's see. That's another good one, though.
Oh, there you go. There's another one. You're speaking of the jQuery reference, yes? Yeah. Everywhere else in the world, it's $ for a jQuery selector, and in PowerSchool, the $J. I can't tell you how many times I've copied code off the web. I know, shocking, right? A developer would copy code off the web.
Appalling. Never heard
That's
of it.
like cheating.
For anybody who's not a full-time developer, if a developer ever tells you that they could do their job without an internet connection in Google, they're lying. Okay.
Which, I mean, there were developers before the internet.
I was just going to say.
I tell you what, you want to talk about appreciation. Like those developers, those old school developers that didn't have the internet to reference to.
Bless their souls.
Yeah. Like you want to talk about
but
an
also back
amazing
then,
skill set.
I mean, there were only 3 languages really that would make up any website. But now there's 3,000.
That's
right. So Ryan, where I thought you were going when you said, tell me about something that you, in your experience, learned to be true, and then you got into PowerSchool. An ID is a primary key.
Yeah, that's another one. So how did that one bung you guys up?
Well, I mean, I've always considered an ID to be a more, at least in like HTML, CSS, I consider an ID to be, a unique identifier. But I realize that's not the case, especially with so many more like frameworks that have popped up in the last, decade or two. But you got to take that with a grain of salt, in my opinion.
I hear what you're saying. My reference, and I'm sorry, Becky, I will shut up here momentarily and let you go. I was referring to the database myself, the PowerSchool database. Becky, is that perchance the direction you were about to go?
Actually, my first thought was HTML, CSS IDs, and I was like, oh yeah, he meant the database. But that really messed me up the first time. And so like consistently going back and forth between IDs and DC IDs, and it seems like, there's like general rules of thumb, but there are also some nuances sprinkled in. So it's like, this is always the case, except for this table and this table.
And this one, and this one, and this one.
That's been exciting. It's never boring.
I'll tell you what gets me, and I've noticed it's tripped up a lot of people that are learning PowerSchool and the PowerSchool schema, is joining the terms table.
Oh,
James, you know what I'm talking about, man. You and I have had this conversation.
Yeah.
It is not intuitive. That ID should be a unique identifier.
James is like, I don't want to talk about it.
No, never again.
No, this never happened.
Yeah, that
Blocked
one.
it from my memory. You realize I'm in therapy for this, Eric, and now you're bringing it up on a podcast.
I dreamed about this last night.
Well, and the students table notwithstanding, I would say in most cases, at least, the students table, again, this is almost a tribal knowledge thing. If it's a newer table, it's a DC ID. If it's an older table, it's on the ID. But one that still fails to be, I think, clear to people new to the game is the schools table with their school number. Instead of, because I mean that one has, I don't know if that one has a DC ID. For sure, it has an ID. Either way, every other table will reference a school ID. Whereas that school ID references school number on the schools table.
Boy, that's not intuitive. That's not just common knowledge. So
why doesn't student ID reference student number on the students table?
Don't ask questions.
Yeah, just learn it and figure it out, right? So one thing I was really excited about this is we typically have guests on the podcast that come from either an educational perspective, but finally we have someone coming from the developer world. A lot of times Eric is kind of left out in some of these conversations because he's never worked in a school. Becky, you obviously have as a teacher, but really on the development side, I mean, you didn't come from a school in that realm.
Mhm.
So I'm excited to get Eric kind of involved and look back on his early days of, being a developer coming into the PowerSchool world. Like, we always reference and look back at previous versions of PowerSchool, but these things that are tripping up Becky and James and the new developers, were these things that were tripping you up when you first started as well?
Absolutely, for sure. I think there are some things that have gotten better, and some things, I don't want to say worse. I want to say they've gotten more complicated.
Very
So,
diplomatic.
why, thank you. I mean, I think back to when I first started, we had virtual tables and custom fields.
That's the first thing I was hoping you'd bring up.
Right. I mean, understanding and working with virtual tables could be a royal pain in the butt. And they've really made a lot of strides. And at the same time, like when I was customizing back in the day, page fragments and insertion points weren't a thing. So the maintenance aspect, the ability for different customizations to live in harmony wasn't there. So that's come a long way. But at the same time, let's think about that now. We've actually complicated this because before, when I would just go add a table row to a table, for someone who's a developer, not a big deal, right? Throw some HTML on a page and jQuery it or vanilla JavaScript it, whatever, DOM manipulate it to where you want to go. But all of a sudden, I mean, it's a beautiful thing, right? Because it makes it so much more sustainable. But we've taken this kind of simple thing that someone who's a very introductory level can accomplish, and we've made it much more difficult for them. I'd say the same thing about, it's great that PowerSchool is moving in a direction of adopting the Angular and AngularJS frameworks, a more modern development style. But it's scary to me now that on the developer site, there are 3 different pages which are specific to here's how you customize PowerTeacher Pro. Here's how you customize contacts. Here's how you customize the home screen. It just used to be if you knew some HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, you're good to go.
Yeah. And that's I've agreed. I've said that with the customization thing. I like that everything's more stable than it's been in the past, and it's more of a standard. But yeah, it definitely takes away from the ability for the novice to do things effectively. One thing I want you to throw back on here, just though, because the first thing we talked about was virtual tables, and for Becky and James here, have you heard of the virtual tables? Has anyone explained this to you? Do you know what they are? And if not, maybe Eric, take it away.
This is basically the PowerSchool equivalent of like talking to your grandpa where he like walked to school 10 miles uphill both ways. This is like PowerSchool's version with virtual tables.
Am I the grandpa in this analogy?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Take it away, Gramps.
So is this I think this is a no. I doubt either of you have ever heard.
No, I have not dealt with virtual
No,
tables.
these
And
things.
you won't.
Hopefully.
You never will.
Yeah.
These things existed, gosh. So I first started in 2009.
Well, and to be clear, they still do
probably-
exist.
Well, sure they do.
We just don't need to use them anymore.
There's a virtual tables data, right? Is that right, Ryan? Virtual tables
there's
data
3.
table? 3 of them.
Yep.
And you could create your own virtual table. There were no extensions, so you couldn't create your own tables. But they had 3 pre-existing tables, which you could use as your pseudo table. And then they just had a bunch of generic fields in there. Like, correct me if I'm wrong. It's been a long time, Ryan. I don't know how well you remember this, but there's like text 1, text 2, text 3, date 1, date 2, date 3. And then you could use those. So if you had 100 different virtual tables, then what you really had, now granted, yes, that was divided by 3, right? There was virtual tables data 1, 2, 3. But if you had 100 different tables, then what you really had was 100 different tables worth of data jammed into one table. And honestly, I'm not digging on it. It worked.
No, yeah.
Database extensions are way better, but it worked for what it did. I've built things similar to that since then because I don't have. There are certain times when I need flexibility and don't have the ability to allow, say, the customer to create a table that's going to integrate with my code. I've done similar things, but yeah, how far we've come, and the ability now with custom fields instead of the custom club to define data types. So I don't know if we ever talked about this, Becky and James, but prior to database extensions, the one-to-one. So the one-to-many extensions were the virtual tables. The one-to-one extensions were the custom fields. And custom fields were just basically, we take all of this custom data. If I've got 100 custom fields for a student, I serialize it into a big string and jam it into a big old custom clob.
Oh yeah, we've talked about this.
Oh yeah. And there's no data type in there. So man, we've come a long way. And I feel now at this point like I'm usurping this conversation. So I'm going to drink some beer and see what you all have to say.
It's grumble, grumble, grumble.
Thanks, Grandpa.
Yeah. No, I mean, I feel like the gen table and the press table are still very reminiscent of that, though.
And what you're saying, like, definitely resonates in a way, being hyper modular, like, oh, it's great, it's organized, it's more reusable. But to an extent, there can be too much of a good thing, and you can kind of be limited by how modular you've made your code or made your tables, so, or how normalized you've made them. So definitely interesting to hear.
Can I tell you how happy it makes me to hear you say that, Becky? That's it's just really interesting.
She's a suck up.
Talking to different developers and watching, having looked at different developers' code. Lots of people have different ideas about how modular things should be. And Becky and I seem to oftentimes kind of align in our thought patterns of where the proper balance comes out. I would agree that you can over modularize. I've seen people modularize to the nth degree, to a point where I feel like it almost becomes unbearable and unreadable.
Right. Yeah. You end up with 50 files open and you still haven't found what you're looking for.
It can be stressful trying to poke through somebody else's code this super modularized.
Yeah, I've definitely preferred the way that, a lot of Eric's code will have like a beautiful function. Let's say it's beautiful function A, and then he's used it in 2 files already. But now we're building a new page, and we're going to use function A in this file as well. But we've waited to modularize this function until we've used it in like more than 2 places. And it's like, well, it's just taking up extra room at this point. We might as well stick it in a wildcard and reference it that way. And it's just like slow steps into modularization. It's not like everything needs to be modular immediately.
And I believe you've also been thoroughly impressed and satisfied with my skill and thoroughness of commenting
and handsomeness.
Commenting my
Wisdom.
code for you, Becky. Yes.
Yeah, I'm impressed with all of it.
Yeah, no, Becky, that was intended. That was your opportunity to take a dig at me. I do feel bad for you. We've had conversations about that. So if it's not already clear to all of our listeners, Becky is working on my team, modifying many of the plugins that I've written. James is on a different team, so he hasn't had as much of the benefit of having to update.
Benefit or the
code.
detriment?
Yeah, Grandpa's ultimate wisdom.
That's up for debate.
He just hears about it at dinner.
Yeah, I'm sure he does. Because I know Becky and I have looked at code before, and she's like, "Can we just review this file?" And I'm like, "That's awful."
No, it's like once y'all hang up, then like through this wall, I just hear her screaming like, "Ah!"
Probably well.
Why would you write this?
You better.
That's okay. So, we often blame like time travel and time paradoxes whenever we find like really bad code or just like a little bit, it's like a little sloppy, but we're like, no, someone else probably went back in time and changed this to make us look foolish.
That makes a lot of sense.
I was never that dumb.
Yeah, there's no way I did that.
That looks like Canadian code.
It happens.
A lot of extra A's in there. So, other things that have caught you guys up, especially coming from like a true development world coming into PowerSchool. Anything else come to mind? Or Eric, other things that you dealt with when you were just starting, especially without the documentation and wonderful people that you worked with to help you out.
Oh gosh, the PS HTML really is, I think, understanding and figuring out what different PS HTML resources are available to you and when to use them and how to use them. They can be so powerful. And thank you, by the way. I think you both kind of gave me a little shout out on the customization reference, which, by the way, friends, for anyone who's listening, is a free plugin. So if you're customizing, I think you got to have it. But thank you for that shout out, Becky and James. And I really only called out in that reference because I use it as a teaching material. What I find to be the most commonly used PS HTML, but there's so much more, so much more. I was working with another developer today, and I rarely use this, but it was the JS field param. Ryan, are you with me on this?
Yep.
She needed to find a field on the page. And of course, part of what happens server side when a page loads up is those inputs that are named students DOB or whatever table in square brackets followed by the name. They get renamed to something else when they get delivered to the client. And she needed to find a certain input. Didn't have an ID or anything else on it. So in JavaScript, it's like, oh yeah, if I can only remember what that is, the JS field param. I mean, gosh, there's just so much out there in terms of the PS HTML world that can be so helpful. And it's so hard to remember what all of the options are. I've had some people that have taken that customization reference plugin and hacked into it and added their own. If you're a good enough developer, yeah, I love it when people do that. Hacking your own frequently used on your server PS HTML codes. Another thing I think is to know when to use PS HTML and when not to. Usually, like if I'm using PS HTML in the context of SQL and TList, or if I'm using it in the context of JavaScript, if I can avoid using that and I can use a simple JavaScript if or contains or some type of JavaScript structure that's not PS HTML, then I prefer to go that route. Just because it's well documented, something you can Google.
That's true. More universal. Props are well deserved on that customization documentation, by the way. Few things please a dev more than well-written docs. One thing that I've really enjoyed with working with MBA and PowerSchool that I noticed is different from my previous dev jobs is that it's kind of like the best of both worlds. It's almost like you're working with a WYSIWYG, which is like, more drag and drop kind of coding, and then also hard coding and doing actual programming. And it's kind of like a combination of that, because when you have such useful and dynamic tags like PowerSchool tags are, it's almost like you're dragging and dropping. And then you're kind of coding around that as well. So I don't know. To me, it's kind of like the best of both worlds, because if you're working in like a pure WYSIWYG or like a pure CMS, it's less actual coding and more drag and drop and working strictly in that environment. But I do feel like there's a lot of flexibility in the MBA plugins where, we're using PowerSchool tags and we're using TList SQL, but there's a lot more actual coding that goes into it. And I don't know if James would agree, since he's got some experience, like a lot of experience with WordPress, which he did add a lot of custom code to these sites. But he probably would agree with me that there's a lot more actual programming in these plugins than in the other WordPress sites that he's done. Is that correct?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Okay.
In WordPress, there'd be like certain areas that I'd be modifying a plugin, but I feel like every page in PowerSchool that we have, like there's some way that you could, customize it. Well, I think just the scale of the plugins we have in PowerSchool is just so much greater than anything I worked with in WordPress. So it's similar but different.
I mean, I'd say it's pretty safe to assume that the original intention of the creation of these things, like PSHTML, was to make things easier, right?
Mhm.
So, I mean, it's nice to hear that within a year, you've been able to take something that was kind of a struggle and a hassle and realize that it really is helpful.
Yeah, and the same goes for the reverse, where like we've got experience with things that are like pure coding and pure programming. There's no structure there to work around. It's just like creating it all by your lonesome. You're doing all customization basically, and here you've got the best of both worlds. But yeah.
When you're describing the whole, drag and drop, but then also mixing it in with being able to put a little bit of code in there, you unknowingly described PowerSchool's attempt at that, which was ReportWorks.
Oh.
I'm sorry, I should not have laughed there.
Well, I mean, I think you'd be hard pressed to find someone at PowerSchool that wouldn't laugh at that either, because I think ReportWorks exists still only because people had reports in there that they used. But I don't think anyone develops anything new in there, and I don't think there's no work being done on it.
Yeah.
I remember I've said this in the podcast in the past. That was the big new feature being advertised when my district over 10 years ago was coming onto PowerSchool. It was like, oh, and ReportWorks, and you can create all these things and everything, and you can make your reports, and it's so beautiful. And there's classes at PSU, and drag and drop, and then you can make little changes here. And well, it made student timetables for our high schools, and that was it. That was all I was able to really, yeah.
I'll be the first to admit ReportWorks worked great as long as you only needed the data that was available, which was a pretty small. Anyway,
it's funny. Yeah, I've seen ReportWorks around. I just didn't really know what it was, so I just ignored it.
Yeah. It's the first thing you restart when things aren't working.
And every time you add a database extension.
Right.
There's a message for anybody that doesn't get that. There's a joke when you add a database extension. Restart ReportWorks. And it's just like you could ignore that. Fun story. I actually met my lady friend for the first time teaching ReportWorks at Wisconsin PSUG.
Oh, really?
So you can't hate it completely.
Oh.
So, some good
silver lining.
ReportWorks, if nothing else.
Absolutely.
My eternal happiness is probably due to ReportWorks.
Thank you, ReportWorks.
I hope she's listening right now. She is. She's rolling her eyes.
ReportWorks works for you.
That's good. That should be a tagline.
A lot of plugs tonight.
Yeah, I feel like we would be amiss if we don't at least ask this question. What is your favorite thing about PowerSchool development that doesn't exist outside of PowerSchool? This is where we insert the Jeopardy music.
James can go first.
Throw him under the bus. I gotta think. James, go.
Well, I will throw out that I mean T-List is pretty.
Ryan.
Yeah, I think that T-List is really
that's
great.
What you're
it's
going
really
for?
convenient.
You could have just jumped out. You're like, James, go first, but you know what? Yeah.
That's everybody's answer.
I do enjoy T-List, actually. I know that I've heard some
other. You can't
other
have the same Ryan's answer.
I'm piggybacking. But some of the new devs have complained about T-List SQL. But personally, I really like it. I think that it's really flexible and you can do a lot with it. And I just feel like you can put it anywhere. You can put it in your HTML, you can put it in your JavaScript. It's just so versatile. And I mean, like Ryan said earlier, you can get objects out of it, JSON objects. You can get row templates, like for actual rows in a table. It's really versatile, I think. And it works especially beautifully with AngularJS. So honestly, I think the combination of the two is quite nice. So I like
I
it.
do think the flexibility of it is really great.
Mm-hmm.
I
Now,
feel
James, do you have?
I need
Go
to.
ahead. Sorry.
I feel like I need to
Unfortunately, it's
jump in
strongly
right now
deprecated.
and mention that
I did
TLS
this,
SQL is strongly deprecated.
I was waiting for it.
Ryan knew I was going there.
Yep.
And we joke about this a lot in the dev community because TLS SQL is so awesome. I mean, we all love it. It's so powerful. But I want to stress that we're very cautious as we're developing our plugins and using TLS SQL to respect PowerSchool security. It's a big deal. I mean, our last podcast was all about FERPA and PowerSchool security. And that's why PowerSchool officially wants us to move to using more Power Queries instead of TLS SQL. Their data restriction framework will enforce PowerSchool security policies. When we're using TLS SQL, we need to be very conscious of security, and we do take that into consideration. But I want to throw that out there for all of the viewers or listeners that they say it's deprecated, but honestly, they're asking us to err on the or to move or migrate toward using Power Queries. When they say it's deprecated, it doesn't mean that it's going to stop running, because every customization ever written would stop working. And it is awesome.
I wouldn't say Power Queries is my favorite part of development in PowerSchool. I wouldn't say that.
I don't think anybody would, Becky.
Power queries are awesome.
They're powerful.
They span across several files. There are,
but I mean, in reality, they are good. I mean, joking aside, they're just more complicated than TList. They're also more secure and safe.
That's a plus.
Safe.
How safe are we?
Any other thoughts? So, I mean, we hit TLS SQL. Anything else that's cool about developing in PowerSchool? That's a tool that you don't get outside of the PowerSchool development realm.
I've got another one if James can't come up with one.
Just go ahead.
Okay. So one thing I find interesting is that, if you're coding like a whole program, like you're making an entire web app by yourself and you need several different roles, in terms of like administrator, teacher login, student login, that kind of thing. You need several different login roles. Something that's cool, but totally tripped me up when I first started, was switching roles and, coding within the different roles. So I just really enjoy how easy it is to switch between the roles when looking at different views, because I feel like it's a lot more theoretical when it's all in your mind, what the views should look like for each role. But in PowerSchool, you can just swap to the role and suddenly all your views are different and it's all there for you to look at and work within. So I have enjoyed that.
Can I ask a clarifying question on that, Becky? When you say that, are you talking about logging into the different portals, logging in as a teacher versus a guardian or an administrator, or?
Right.
Okay.
But, if you're doing like a warehouse application or something, you would need different logins for like a manager, a standard employee, the CEO kind of thing. So it's just really easy to swap between the role views and work within those environments. So
yeah, I'll second that. Like views from like district compared to a school, like being able to just change that in PowerSchool compared to your code and seeing a completely different page, essentially. I think that's been pretty convenient.
You would probably, sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying, I guess I've never really, I mean, not being a developer outside of PowerSchool, I've never thought about that as being kind of a major thing.
Well, and I still think what's interesting here is because with Eric's question, I still think there's two different pages going on here, to a degree. And I mean, but you guys both bring up good points too. Like, I mean, because Eric said, "Oh, you mean logging in as a teacher," and then James said, "No, I mean switching between schools." And I think Eric, I, and Sean all think of switching roles as in security groups in the admin portal. So it could be.
Okay, well, maybe I just threw it all off.
No, James was right. Swapping between views with like district versus schools versus summer schools, that's the part that's very simple and, just really quick.
Yeah.
But, having a login through different logins, that is a bit more, it's a few more steps. But yeah, I was really speaking to what James was talking about.
Okay. Yeah, and I think what you're saying, I would, I mean, I agree with what you're saying, but I mean, just the fact that from a development standpoint and having your own test server and things like that, being able to just easily have your accounts and access to the different portals too is very helpful. Because I think what's really almost being said here is it's easy to test what you're developing within PowerSchool, within the test environment you have. Of course, as long as you have the data within there, test it with. So don't get me started on report cards when there's no standards data.
I think that the toughest part about testing in PowerSchool is finding the right page to set the right student with the right problem to reproduce an error. Just
that goes back.
It's just such a big platform. There's a lot of different things that you might need to set. That's I'd say that's my main detriment.
Yeah, navigating PowerSchool is probably one of the hardest parts. And even still, like even after 6 months of being here, just today, James was like, "Where can I view the different sections?" I was like, "I think it's this path." He was like, "No." So. And
Eric's now like,
no,
it's
honestly, it's. I sympathize with you guys because honestly, I think those of us that have been working with PowerSchool for years, we don't realize how much we've taken for granted. I mean, you guys have been with us, one of you a little longer than the other, but both of you at least a couple, 2, 3, 4 months now, and learned so much. But there's so much depth to understanding PowerSchool. Like, oh, how do I create a new section? That's just something that's never come up before.
I led him to creating the new section. I just don't know where to view them.
Okay, fair enough.
It's a different page.
But even just, so I felt awful for James the other day. I was working with him, and he had this query in this page that he was working on, and it turned out that the assignment that he was given involved scheduling. So, the things that we've all learned to take for granted, you go here to do this, you go here to do this. And if we're developers, this table holds this information, this table holds this information. And all of a sudden, James is looking at this query that's joining courses,
20
to sections,
tables,
to school staff, to section meeting, to bell schedules, to periods, to bell schedule items. And it's just like, oh my God, if I was looking at this 2 months after starting PowerSchool, my head would explode.
And terms.
And terms.
Right.
Don't join on just the ID, friends.
Well, hey guys, unless there's anything major that you guys want to bring up, I think that about closes up the conversation. Becky and James, thank you so much for joining us. It's great to get a little insight from some developers that are just joining the PowerSchool world. Welcome. Hopefully it's been a warm welcome. And looking forward to seeing what else you guys come up with. But until next time, everyone.
Thanks for joining us, and a special thanks to our subscribers. Consider becoming one today. Enjoy more episodes and learn more at mba-link.com.